Hey guys, this is Miss Arlequin, and in this video, we're going to be doing a test practice from the 2013 7th grade New York State ELA exam. This passage is called Earth and Water and Sky, and it's by Brian Buscemi. It was a long hike through the woods to the thinking pond, but David Brunner didn't mind. He'd been going there for 3 years, ever since he was 10, and had found the lonely stream-fed pool while exploring one summer afternoon. He liked to spend time there more than he liked doing almost anything else. The other kids thought he was kind of weird for going off into the woods by himself so often. David couldn't understand why he seemed to be the only one who saw how amazing it was for a squirrel to run down a tree head first, or how unique each day's sky full of clouds was. His mom said he was more sensitive and thoughtful than other kids his age, but David just felt lonely and left out most of the time. About a quarter of a mile from the pond, David caught sight of the huge, gnarled oak tree he'd nicknamed the Old Giant for its rough, craggy bark and tall, thick trunk. When he reached the giant tree, David sat down and shrugged off his backpack. He unscrewed the lid from his thermos and thirstily drank the cool, tart juice inside. Then he leaned back against the wide trunk to rest for a few minutes. Today, David planned to sketch some interesting fallen trees near the thinking pond. David stood up and continued toward the thinking pond. Suddenly he heard a sharp, whining sound like the engine of a high-flying jet airplane. It was followed by a crack, like a whip being snapped, only 1,000 times louder. Then a ball of fire roared overhead, followed by a searing gust of wind. The shockwave knocked David to the ground, his ears ringing. A second later, he heard an explosive, hissing crash up ahead. A rush of air and hot steam billowed through the trees, and he covered his head as it washed over him. After several minutes, David looked up. The warm, wet mist had dispersed, leaving the woods damp and sparkling with little droplets of water. What the heck just happened? He wondered as he got to his feet. Cautiously but curiously, he headed in the direction of the thinking pond. By now, David could usually see the shine of sunlight on the gently rippling water, but today something was different. Covering the last 100 yards quickly, David stopped at the edge of the meadow where the pond lay. "Whoa," he said in amazement. Before him stretched a dry, cracked mud crater, all that was left of the thinking pond. The water in the 50-foot diameter pool had evaporated, leaving a huge hole in the forest floor. The baked mud rippled out from the center in wide, shallow waves. In the middle of the crater, half buried in the ground, was a rounded, melted lump of something that looked like rock. It was a little larger than a basketball. "I can't believe it," David whispered, awestruck. "It's a meteorite." It was indeed a meteorite. Amazingly, the extraterrestrial rock had landed almost exactly in the center of the thinking pond, its immense heat and force evaporating the water within a split second. But the water had slowed the meteorite down just enough so it hadn't smashed to pieces when it hit the ground. The wet dirt hissed and popped, then dried and stuck. The meteorite was definitely too hot to touch. While he waited for it to cool down, David crouched and took his sketch pad out of his backpack. With quick, sure lines, he made an accurate drawing of the rock. Even as he was drawing, David could hardly believe he was looking at something that had been flying through space only a few minutes before. He wondered where the meteorite had come from. Maybe an asteroid or a comet had passed too close to a planet or the sun, and a chunk of it had been pulled off by gravity. Maybe it had been floating through space for millions of years before Earth's gravitational field had caught it and dragged it in. David sat on the ground beside the thinking pond and watched as the water slowly refilled the hole. It was getting dark when he finally got up to head back home. He could faintly see the meteorite in the darkening water, which was still rising. When he'd come here tomorrow, the rock would be under 10 feet of water, and he probably wouldn't be able to see it at all. As he walked home through the woods, David hoped that nobody would come looking for the meteorite. Probably no one knew that part of it had survived its fiery journey through the Earth's atmosphere. He hoped that the meteorite would stay at the bottom of the thinking pond forever, in a place where the earth, the water, and a piece of the sky all touched each other. All right, so now let's look at the questions for earth, water, and sky and see if we can figure out what the correct answer is and why the wrong answers are wrong. All right, so question number 1. Which sentence from the passage best shows how powerful the meteorite was? All right, a question like this really doesn't even necessarily require you to go back to the passage. These are best evidence questions. And best evidence questions really just want you to look at each line, break them down, think about if the actual evidence, well, first actually think about what's the line or the evidence actually showing. So you got to get the gist of it. And then you have to think about whether or not it's really even showing what the question is asking. So we need to look for how powerful the meteorite was. A. Suddenly he heard a sharp whining sound like the engine of a high-flying jet airplane. All right, so this shows me the sound of the meteorite as it comes down to Earth. Doesn't necessarily show the power, although I would think that if it's traveling fast and it's more powerful, it might make a louder sound. So maybe, but this doesn't seem like the best evidence. I'm probably going to eliminate it. B. Then a ball of fire roared overhead, followed by a searing gust of wind. Okay, so searing has a very strong connotation. If something is searing, it has to be very strong for it to sear. So this looks like it could be a good answer choice. So this is a possibility, although I don't know yet if it's the best choice. C. The shockwave it knocked him to the ground. That's power. Pretty sure that this is actually the right answer. Knocked him to the ground, his ears ringing. It's loud, it knocks him to the ground, so forceful, powerful. A second later, he heard an explosive hissing crash up ahead. All right, so this just shows that the meteorite is crashing. It's not as good as the power behind it knocking somebody to the ground, so I'm going to go with C. All right, question number 2. What does the meteorite event mainly represent to David? Is it the wonder of nature? Well, he does feel the awe. I think they might have even used that word in the passage. When he looks at the meteorite is a part of nature, part of space. Is it the vastness of the universe? Well, not really, because there's no evidence, if you go back to the story, of him wondering about space. He focuses more on the way that the meteorite combines with the earth, how it dried up the water, and he wants it to stay there. So it's not really about the vastness of the universe, it's more about nature and a combination of space and earth, of different parts of nature. The beauty of the landscape. I mean, I'm sure that this might be true, that he might find the land beautiful because he does wonder at the meteorite, but the meteorite is not landscape. He feels more the beauty of the meteorite combined with the beauty of the earth. And this is just focusing on the beauty of the earth. So this might be too limited. Or D, the violence of natural events. Well, this was definitely a violent event because it knocked him back and it did cause some destruction. But if this was going to be what it represented for David, there would have to be a lot more negative descriptions. Basically, how do you know how somebody feels about a topic? It's the way that they talk about it, the types of words they use, the connotations. And nowhere in the passage did David really use any kind of negative connotations to describe the meteorite. And violence is a negative connotation, so there'd have to be negative descriptions. He'd have to react poorly towards the meteorite, but he really does act more like, wow, this is amazing. And he's hoping it stays there. He wants to keep wondering at it and feeling awe from it. So A is the best choice. All right, what does the author mean by the phrase, a piece of the sky, in lines 68 and 69? Well, the meteorite is a piece of the sky. Like, I feel like I can just predict the answer choice without even looking at the options. But I just want to go back and just make sure that I reread the actual part of the story, where that comes from. Just so I'm not assuming an answer. I'm really basing it in text evidence. As he walked home through the woods, David hoped that nobody would come looking for the meteorite. Probably no one knew that part of it had survived its fiery journey through the Earth's atmosphere. He hoped that the meteorite would stay at the bottom of the thinking pond forever, in a place where the earth, the water, and a piece of the sky all touched each other. All right, yeah, so it's definitely referring to the meteorite? Is it a cloud reflected in the pond? No. An asteroid half buried in a muddy crater? Well, it's not an asteroid. So now what they're really doing, I can see in the other answer choices, is giving you the difference in science. And this is really just a detail from the story. You have to know that it was a meteorite that was being described. So this is a pretty easy answer. I mean, it's really just there to trick people who are not reading the story carefully enough and who maybe get tricked by different things in science. Maybe you're not as strong as science, so you just go, oh, asteroid, meteorite, same thing. All right, it's obviously D. All right, next. How is David's view of himself different from his mother's view of him? All right, so I definitely don't remember him talking about his mother's view of himself, so I'm going to have to go back into the passage and figure out what part of the story that is. So I'm going to have to scan for mom or mother. All right, I think I maybe went too far. I would think it would probably make sense that it might be in the beginning. Oh, here we go. Yep. His mom said he was more sensitive and thoughtful than other kids his age. But David just felt lonely and left out most of the time. All right, so that's the evidence that's going to help me narrow down my answer choice. His mom says he's more sensitive and thoughtful than other kids. He feels lonely. Okay, David feels left out. His mother thinks he's sensitive. It's almost exactly reworded. We should only wish for questions that are this easy on our state test. David feels most comfortable alone, but his mother thinks he's lonely. That contradicts what's in the passage. It's the opposite. He feels lonely. David thinks of himself as thoughtful. Again, this contradicts. It's the mother who thinks he's thoughtful, sensitive. David thinks of himself as odd. Not quite the word he uses, but his mother thinks he's just more mature. This is not what she says. This is a very, very easy question. Again, we should only hope that they'll have more questions like this on the test. All right, next. Which lines from the passage best support the idea that David thinks like a scientist? All right, we should also hope that there aren't questions like this because this is so much work. You have to go back and look at each of these sections. It would be so much easier if they just quote it for you in the answer choices. So this is an annoying question, but we can do it. We're looking for him thinking like a scientist. Let's look at lines 15 through 20 first. When he reached the giant tree, David sat down and shrugged off his backpack. He unscrewed the lid from his thermos and thirstily drank the cool, tart juice inside. Okay, he's just drinking stuff here. That's nothing scientific about it. I'm going to eliminate it. 29 through 31. Okay. The shockwave knocked David to the ground, his ears ringing. A second later, he heard an explosive hissing crash up ahead. A rush of air and hot steam billowed through the trees, and he cut. Okay, this is him just being a person reacting to a violent event. He's not thinking anything scientific at the time. Anybody would be reacting and describing the scene the same way as him, regardless of whether they're a scientist. 54 through 59. All right, so it's got to either be C or D. Okay, 54 through 59. Even as he was drawing, David could barely believe he was looking at something that had been flying through space only a few minutes before. Anybody could be thinking this. This is maybe even an artist. He wondered where the meteorite had come from. Okay, a little bit more science. Maybe an asteroid or a comet had passed too close to a planet or the sun. Okay, you got to be a scientist. I would never know anything about this. What could have caused it? He's thinking about the possible scientific causes of this. Maybe it had been floating through space for millions of years. I wouldn't even know that meteorites maybe fly through space for millions of years. You have to have scientific knowledge for that. This is a very, very tempting answer. But 65 through 69 could be better. You got to check all your answer choices. You don't want to pick the distractor. All right, I remember this paragraph. We looked at it already. This is not science. This is just him, like, hoping he can keep looking at it. I'm not a scientist. I would hope that the meteorite could stay so I could enjoy it some more. There's nothing scientific about that. It's definitely C. All right, next question. Read the last sentence of the passage. He hoped that the meteorite would stay at the bottom of the thinking pond forever, in a place where the earth, the water, and a piece of the sky all touched each other. Which sentence from the passage best matches this characterization of David? All right, before I can go into it, I have to really on my own figure out what is the characterization of David. When you talk about characterization, you're talking about the way that the author describes that character's personality, the type of person they are, their disposition. All right, so first, in order to do that, you also, like any kind of analysis, you got to get the gist first. What are these lines basically about? What's happening, the basics, who and what? David is leaving. He's hoping the meteorite will stay there. It's kind of beautiful the way that he describes it. He's describing this like meeting, this synthesis of the different elements of our world, space, sky, earth, water. It's a little spiritual. It kind of reminds me of some kind of spiritual witchy kind of thought, right? Witches are always thinking about the different elements and the way the different elements interact with each other when they make their spells. So I would say that this shows that not only is David a scientist, but he's got a little poetic, romantic kind of part of him. And this also goes back, I remember an earlier question talked about the wonder of nature. That's something that I see David throughout this story kind of feeling, how wonderful nature is, how beautiful this all is. David couldn't understand why he seemed to be the only one who saw how amazing it was for a squirrel to run down a tree head first, or how unique each day's sky full of clouds was. This matches it, right? He's wondering at the beauty. It's a little poetic. This looks like a good answer. His mom said he was more sensitive and thoughtful than other kids his age. Ooh, this is tempting. The thoughtful, the sensitive, but he just feels lonely. That part doesn't match this. So this is, I think, a distractor answer because they want you to say that the first part matches it and ignore the fact that the second half of it, when he says is lonely, that really has nothing to do with these ending lines. This is just another different part of his personality. All right, C. About a quarter of a mile from the pond, David caught sight of a huge gnarled oak tree he nicknamed the Old Giant for its rough, craggy bark. All right, I mean, that's kind of cute that he did that. He names parts of nature, but it's not as poetic. It's not as, like, full of wonder as the evidence is and as answer choice A is. So I'm going to eliminate this. D. By now, David could usually see the shine of sunlight on the gently rippling water, but today something was different. All right, these are all, you can see where questions like this, best evidence, what makes them so tough is that all of the evidence seems good, but you're looking for the best one, the peanut butter cup evidence, as we've talked about in class. By now, David could usually see the sun of sunlight. So he's looking at the beauty of nature, but then he wonders that he notices something's different. This is more about his observations than him looking at nature and thinking about how beautiful it is. Here, this one is such strong evidence. There's nothing else. Like D could show something else. It could just show his like observation, like his the way that he has the mind of a scientist and he's always observing things. But A, the only thing it could show is the same thing as the last line of the story, that he is awed by the beauty of nature. All right, A is definitely the answer. All right, and our final question. Read this sentence from lines 30 and 31 of the passage. A rush of air and hot steam billowed through the trees, and he covered his head as it washed over him. What do the words billowed and washed suggest about the steam? All right, if something's washing over you, it's like you can't stop it. It's huge. It's massive. It's all over. Unstoppable. I kind of feel like when you go into the heat after, like, you leave an indoor location where the air conditioning feels amazing and you open the door and like a blast of heat just kind of washes over you. It's very strong. That it shrunk in size and speed. No. That it thinned out and disappeared. I can see where somebody would be tricked by it. But if it's washing over you, it's not thin. It's all over your body. No. That it spread quickly and in waves. This is a little bit better. That it was lightweight and remained close to the ground. No, if it's washing over you, it's covering his head. Look at the other context clues in the sentence. That doesn't really match it. You know, when you go back to the words, billowing is like a rippling kind of effect. And once again, if something's washing over you, it's all over you. And it hits you quickly. If I think about what my original connection about how I open the door coming out of air conditioning onto a hot day, you get slammed by that heat and it washes over you, the heat. So it does come quickly. I think C is the best answer here. Right? It's not thinning out and disappearing. It's the opposite. When it washes over him, it's there. Yeah, this is definitely the answer. C.